What's up guys, Boss here, and in today's video I'm going to be doing a tier list ranking every single card in the game. So it's been a while since I've done one of these videos, and as you guys know, the meta has completely changed since then because there's 3 new champions in the game, and them alone completely changed the decks that people are using, you know, the cards that synergize with them. And then of course we had the balance changes too, where some cards recently got buffed and nerfed. So I've been playing this game now for about 5.5 years, so I feel like I have a really good understanding of the game, not just playing ladder, but also competitive, you know, global tournaments, all different kinds of game modes. So I feel like I have a good understanding of the game, and of course this is just my opinion. You guys can feel free to let you guys know your opinion in the comments below. And as always, S tier means the card is very, very good, and of course could receive a nerf, and D tier essentially means the card is very, very weak and most likely could use a buff or some type of rework. So with that being said, we start off here with the Bandit, which to me is just an average card. I think it's, you know, pretty good in bridge spam, such as, you know, Pekka or, you know, Mega Knight decks, but it's nothing too special. Same with the Archers, they're going to go right into B tier as well, just as an average card, because I mean they're decent in, you know, Expo and maybe Hog, but they're overall not that great, especially with how many people are using arrows in this meta. And same with Barbarians, I'm going to put them in B tier as well, just because I think of them as an average card. You could honestly argue that they should be in C tier, and they're at the very low end of B, I would say, because guards are kind of replacing them and are better in most decks, but I still got to give them B tier just because I think they get an okay amount of value. Now, the Barrel, on the other hand, this is going to be our first A tier card because for 2 Elixir, it gets quite a lot of value. It is not quite S tier because there's other spells that are better than it, in my opinion. But, I mean, it's good on defense for just 2 Elixir, good on offense to pressure, and there's lots of uses to it. It's a very versatile card. Bats, on the other hand, are going to be A tier as well because they're very, very good in bait decks, and kind of like the Barrel for 2 Elixir, they get an insane amount of value. They used to be S tier, but there was one point where they ended up getting nerfed. So, I mean, I think they belong in S tier, or A tier right now, but they used to be in S tier. So I think that's a good place for them. The Healer is going to be D tier. I don't know if she actually needs a buff, just because I think it could lead to toxic metas, you know, with Barb Hut, or, of course, with the Elixir Golem, as you guys know, but you cannot deny the fact that she is a very weak card right now. She got a 10% health nerf, I believe it was, a long time back, and that pretty much, I wouldn't say killed her, but made her, you know, so much worse. Battle Ram, after the recent buff it got, is still not the best. I still am going to put it in C tier. It actually was in D tier, I think, in my last tier list, but the buff definitely moved it up 1 ranking just because it does a little bit more damage now. It's a bit better. Dark Goblin's going to go all the way up into A tier. I think after his recent buff, he is now a really solid card that you guys are going to have to watch out for. I think before he was a B or a C even, but after the recent balances, he was one of the biggest winner of the balances. I mean, he is a very, very solid card now, and Logbait Rascals with him, just insane. Bomber is going to be B tier. I think after the nerf the Bomber got, it's just not nearly as good as it was. It was S tier, but the range nerf definitely did affect it. And yeah, I gotta say, it's definitely B. I mean, great value for 2 Elixir, but you don't see it a ton. I mean, really, it's only used, you'll sometimes see it in Lava decks or Drill Cycle, but I don't, you know, I'm actually tempted it could be A, but we'll leave it as a very high B. Bomb Tower is going to be C tier. I just think there's a lot of buildings better than it. It was D, but then after the buff it got a little while ago, it moves up to C. And, I mean, it's good against Royal Hogs, I gotta give it that, and Royal Hogs are super good in this meta, but I just don't think it's that strong overall. The Bowler's actually going to be B tier. I think it's actually a little bit underrated, and I've been seeing it a lot in this current meta because there's a lot of Royal Hogs, and it's not bad. I mean, defensively, it's super solid, especially in, you know, Lumberloon Freeze, Graveyard decks. I'm sure you guys have seen those decks around quite a lot recently. The Elixir Collector is going to be D tier. It's just, I mean, I don't even need to talk about it that much. I feel like you guys all know it's really bad, especially with Earthquake in the game. Just so many spells counter it, and, you know, I think it needs some sort of rework. I don't think a direct buff would be good. I think it just straight up needs some sort of rework. I don't know what kind, but something like that for sure. E-Barbs are going to be in, I'm almost tempted to put them in A tier, but here's what I'm going to do. I changed my mind about Bomber. Let's put Bomber in A just because I just think it's stronger overall than the cards I put in B, and yeah, E-Barbs are B. I think of them as average. I mean, obviously mid-ladder players think they're very, very strong, but I just think they're pretty easy to counter if you know what you're doing, even with very cheap cards like Skeletons and Ice Golem. Baby Dragon's going to be A tier because it is, for 4 Elixir, a flying card, very versatile. You can use it in graveyard decks, you could use it in Lava, you could use it in Golem, you could play it in Electro Giant, you name it. So versatile, so good. Used to be S tier, and I think at one point it got a health nerf. Here we go. First S tier card, Archer Queen. I mean, no doubt, right? I think everyone knows that. I mean, I think she's either the best champion or the second best champion, which we will get to, you know, in a little bit. But for just 4 Elixir and then her 1 Elixir ability, it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, you basically get value every single time you activate that ability. And, sorry, she's 5 Elixir. I was mixing it up with the Skeleton King. But yeah, 5 Elixir and then 1 Elixir ability, just absolutely broken. And yeah, I mean, I think she obviously needs a nerf. I do think Champion should be strong though, but she's a little bit too strong. Inferno is going to be in... Man, I almost think it should be D tier. It's a very low C, because there's cards worse than it, but Inferno is very, very bad, in my opinion. Worse than Bomb Tower, for sure. I think it's, you know, for 5 Elixir, not good, especially in this current meta. And yeah, it's one of the worst buildings. Mortar is going to be... Actually, I'm almost tempted to put it A tier, but we'll do B. I think there's buildings better than it, but it's for sure, you know, in comparison to like an Inferno and some of the other buildings, it is pretty solid. Tesla, on the other hand, is our next one up, and that is certainly A. So, yeah, it might come off as a surprise because Tesla did just get nerfed 2 times in a row, but Tesla used to be S tier, and after those nerfs, it's still A. It is still a above average card. I know Expo players were kind of salty about the nerf Tesla got, but I think everyone can agree the nerf was pretty deserved because after those 2 nerfs, it is still one of the best buildings, if not the best building in the game still. Expo, on the other hand, is C tier. Expo is weak because right now because of the Expo itself. I mean, the other cards in Expo are actually all quite strong, if you're being honest. You know, like the Tesla especially, you know, the Skeletons, the Fireball, all very, very good. But the Expo itself, you know, after the nerf, yeah, it's definitely on the weaker side. I don't think it's D tier because, you know, it can get some good value in lots of matchups, and if they don't have a great counter to it, you know, you can still, like I said, get a lot of value out of it and abuse the fact they don't have a good counter. Canon card is S tier. One of the most underrated cards in the game. I know a lot of other YouTubers, CR YouTubers who do tier lists will also often put it in S tier, and I think it's one of the ones that, you know, is surprising to a lot of people because a lot of mid-ladder players don't use the Canon card, maybe because it's still a card that's new, as in it wasn't one of the first cards added to the game, so they don't have it leveled up. But let me tell you guys, Canon card is super solid. I mean, it does good against any spell because a lightning, yeah, will take it out, same with a rocket, but then you still got the cannon up. Whereas a fireball doesn't even kill it, you know, or poison. You have to overcommit with the log, and just the amount of value it gets on defense and the counter push is ridiculous. It is actually just a really, really strong card. Now, the cannon, I think, is D tier. It's a very high D tier, in my opinion. If they buff the cannon, please, Supercell, I beg you, separate it from the cannon card. Do not give the cannon card another buff. That is not what we need, but the cannon itself is very weak because it's really only good in 2.6, and even 2.6 right now is pretty bad. So the cannon, yeah, I just don't think of it as a very good card. I mean, it can get lots of value in some situations, but it's just not great. Balloon is an A tier card. It's even borderline S. I think it is easily one of the best win conditions in the whole game right now, and with the Tesla getting nerfed, it is probably even slightly better. Like, I think Lava Loon is in a really good spot right now, especially after the Tombstone buff. Golem is going to be... I give it C tier because I think it's one of the weaker win conditions right now, especially after the nerf it got, just because it's... I don't know, and just the meta right now, too, isn't great for it. The Night Witch nerf, there's many factors that are, you know, went into Golem, like, not being in a good spot right now, and yeah, it is just definitely not that great. The Witch is actually C tier as well. It was D tier for the longest time, but I think they finally gave it enough buffs to where it's actually in a decent spot right now, you know, in Giant Graveyard, in some type of, you know, weird clone decks, or even, you know, a lot of other different kinds of graveyard decks. You know, you compare, you know, use some like off meta things with it and have success with it. I mean, it's not awful. Cologne is kind of borderline D tier, but it's also kind of C. I'll just do C just because it's kind of a type of card that, kind of like the Witch, used in some off-meta decks, you know, you can get good value out of it. It is only 3 elixir, so not a huge risk, and I think C's fine. It's a very low C. Dark Prince is A tier. I think recently we've seen a lot of Dark Prince because it's just a very versatile card, and for 4 elixir, it gets us a lot of value, for the splash it does. Now, I mean, do I think it's broken and deserves S tier? I don't quite think so, but it is for sure a high A. Night Witch, I think, is a D. This is part of the reason why Golem is not very good right now. It's a very, very high D, though. I think, you know, obviously it's better than the Elixir. I'll put it in the very front there just to, like, emphasize that, but I think it's very bad, and it's why Golem is kind of bad right now. Some maybe small buff to it could be good. The bats are very good, though, so they have to be pretty careful how they buff the Night Witch and make sure it's not related to the bats. The Earthquake is an A tier card. It's been really good the past few metas, especially paired with the Royal Hogs and the Hog Rider. I mean, there's a lot of buildings right now, and even if your opponent doesn't have a building, you can obviously accumulate so much damage just by cycling Earthquakes, especially in double and triple elixir, so it's a really, you know, versatile spell and not much risk to it, such as having a spell like a Rocket where it might not get as much value throughout the match. The Electro Drag is going to be... I give it C tier. It's probably a pretty low C as well. I think it's a card that they could argue, you know, that it could get a small buff and it would probably be okay, but it's kind of like the Witch in the sense that it's viable, but it's just for sure on the weaker side, you know. Electro Giant is going to be A tier. I think ever since the, you know, nerf it got, you can't say anymore that it's S tier. It's absolutely not after the health nerf it got. I even think before the nerf, I don't know if it was necessarily S tier, but I think now for sure you can say it's A tier. It's above average as a win condition. Especially, I know a bunch of mid-ladder players hate it. Everyone's like, you know, nerf the Electro Giant, or I can't stop this Electro Giant. And that's exactly why it's pretty solid. If you don't have a Pekka or a building, or at least, you know, like a Fisherman or something, you're kind of screwed. So if you're using some mid-ladder deck with like Mega Knight, Wizard, or something, yeah, you're going to get rolled by the Electro Giant. So I don't blame you for saying it's really strong. So next up, we got the Barb Hut. D tier, D tier. Ever since the spawner nerf, it is probably the worst building in the whole game with the Elixir Collector. It is very, very bad. Electro Spirit's A tier. I think of all the spirits, it's either the best one, that or the Fire Spirit. It gets so much value for one elixir. The chain effect it has, super solid. Ewiz is going to be B tier. We got another average card here. So, I mean, Ewiz, yeah, you know, it's alright, but after those 2 damage nerfs it got, you know, it's just kind of an average card now that pairs, you know, alright in, like, bridge spam decks, or, you know, in, like, control decks. It's not bad. Elixir Golem is D tier. I don't think it's that good. I mean, same with the Healer. Both the Healer and the Elixir Golem are weak right now, and the Night Witch, so you can see why Elixir Golem kind of completely fell out of the meta, which I guess I'm not that mad about, because it's kind of a toxic deck. But yeah, I mean, Barb Hut, Elixir Golem, Healer, Night Witch, all really bad. That's why you don't see a lot of Elixir Golem anymore. Executioner, after the buff it got, I'm going to put it... Do I even want to put it in C tier? I feel like it's still D, because the buff didn't change anything. But maybe it's a very low, or a very high C. But I don't know. Now that I'm comparing it to the other cards in C, it's making me think it's a D, but I'll just leave it in C for now because I think the cards I have in D are worse than it. But anyway, Firecracker's A tier. I know some people always think I overrate the Firecracker and it really should be B tier, but I truly think it is A tier because not just on ladder, but also just in competitive, it can be great if the opponent, you know, used arrows already. You can just abuse it, get so much value, and it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, it's what makes Hog EQ so strong, not even just the Hog itself and the Tesla, the Firecracker too. Like, all those cards combined is what makes it such a strong deck. Fireball, in this current meta, to be honest, might be S tier, because there's so many people using Royal Hogs, and even after the poison buff, it's just proven to be the dominant spell. And yeah, I mean, I just think it's the best spell in the game, so, or at least big spell, it's definitely the best one in the game, so I'm gonna have to give it S. Do I think it needs a nerf? It could get a small one, to tell you the truth. Goblin Hut's gonna be D tier. just because after the spawner nerf, kind of like the Barb Hut, it's really bad. Now, it's definitely better than the Barb Hut, but it's pretty bad. Pretty bad. Furnace is C, because even though it got nerfed along with the Goblin Hut and the, you know, the Barb Hut, it's less of a risk with it only being 4 Elixir, and with the Fire Spirits being, you know, pretty solid compared to one Spear Goblin getting spawned out or Barbarians, and just, like, overall the risk factor's a lot lower. I just gotta give it C, because if the opponent doesn't have Earthquake or a Poison, it could still get some solid value. So, Fire Spirit is gonna be A tier. It got some type of range nerf in the last balance, but I still think of it as, you know, with the Electro Spirit, the strongest spirit. It's very good for only 1 Elixir, very versatile. It can synergize pretty much in just about any deck. Fisherman is gonna be, I think of it as a B tier card, because it's really only good in RG. And RG, after the nerf it got, we haven't seen as much of it. And in this current meta too, with a lot of the champions that do pretty good against RG, and champions don't synergize the best in RG, that since we haven't seen as much Fisherman, I think I gotta put it in B tier. It's like average right now. Flying Machine 2 is kind of average. I don't think of it as above average anymore, just because we don't see as much Lava Clone. Really, the only deck Flying Machine's used in is that Recruits Hog deck, but I don't even think the Flying Machine is what makes that deck strong. Freeze is going to be C tier. It's kind of like the Clone type of card where, you know, you don't see very often, but can get some really good value in Graveyard and Balloon Freeze. I don't really think it should get buffed either, which is another reason why I'm putting it in C. I think the cards that are in D could deserve a buff a little more. Ghost is actually going to be in A tier, believe it or not. We've seen a rise in use rate of the Ghost, not just from my perspective. I think that was even proven on Royal API and just the use rate in general. Like, you guys have probably noticed too, a lot of people are running it because Bridge Spam has been kind of making a comeback, you know, with Pekka and, you know, Mega Knight, and just in general, I think the splash is good against Royal Hogs, so I think people are realizing that, or realizing it was kind of underrated, so people are using it more. Okay, I'm a little biased about this. It's going to be C or lower. The Giant is a very weak win condition in this meta. It's kind of like the Golem, very, very weak. Giant may even be slightly worse, but no, I actually think it's about the same as the Golem right now. Very bad in comparison to other win conditions like the Hog, the Royal Hogs. I could even be D tier, because I truly think, kind of like the Elixir Golem, it's very bad, very easy to counter, but because of the fact that Giant Graveyard is actually a solid, you know, combination, and someone even finished top 10 in the world with Giant Graveyard last season, so I gotta give it C. I can't put it in D. I think it's, like, at least viable, and, you know, it could use a buff, but it doesn't necessarily need one. Giant Skeleton is... I think it's a low C too. I don't think it's D tier, because we do see it is viable in some very, very strange decks, or to catch the opponent off guard, and they did buff it back a little bit when they completely nerfed it. Yeah, it's not as good, but it's viable. It is viable in some, you know, situations, and it's fine, I think. Spear Goblins are A tier. I think they get a lot of value for only 2 Elixir, and they just do a great job on defense in, you know, cheap decks, and then offense too when counter pushing. They're really solid, I think, for just 2 Elixir. It's kind of the same as the Bats, honestly. So the Goblin Barrel is going to be B tier. I think it's back to being an average card ever since they changed the Fire Spirit so it can't fully counter Goblin Barrel. We've seen a rise in Logbait recently after the Dark Goblin buff, but that doesn't necessarily mean the Goblin Barrel's A tier just because Logbait's back. Goblin Barrel itself is definitely an average card. I mean, because if the opponent has Log or a Bar Barrel, they obviously have a direct counter to it. The Cage is going to be A tier. I even think I put it in S tier in the last tier list I did, but after the nerf it got, we definitely noticed it's a tiny bit weaker, kind of like the Tesla, but not many interactions have changed, so both the Tesla and the Cage are still, in my opinion, the best buildings in the game. Drill is going to go in C tier. I know this might come off as a surprise to you guys, because Drill, you guys might think of it as being really, really bad, but it's actually viable if played perfectly, and because a lot of the cards in Drill decks are also pretty strong, like the Bomber and, you know, the Tesla, it's not bad at all, and it gets guaranteed damage pretty much every time. It's not, you know, it's not as bad as you think. I just think it's a hard card to play. The Goblin Gang is going to be what do I want to put it in? I guess it's average, I want to say. I consider it an average card, kind of like the Goblin Barrel. The Goblin Giant is going to be C tier, I think, because it doesn't really pair well in any decks except Sparky for the most part, and Sparky isn't even great in the meta right now. The Goblins are going to be C tier. We've seen a bit more of them ever since they got that small buff. And the Golden Knight is S tier. Here we go. We got our 4th S tier card. Because let me tell you guys, the Golden Knight and the Archer Queen are both just as good in my opinion, depending on the matchup, right? If the opponent has Lightning, the Archer Queen will not get nearly as much value as you would like it to. The Golden Knight gets value every single matchup. So if the opponent doesn't have Lightning, you could argue the Queen will get more value in those matchups than the Golden Knight would. But Golden Knight all around, every single matchup, he's going to get value. It doesn't matter what spells your opponent has. It doesn't even really matter what cards your opponent has. He will get a lot of value for his 1 Elixir Dash. He is insane, and both the Queen and the Golden Knight, very shocked they didn't get a nerf in the last balances. So Graveyard is going to be a A-tier card. I think ever since the Mother Witch got nerfed, we've seen kind of a rise in the, Graveyard use rate because people can use it with Poison again and different variations of it instead of always having to use it with Fireball. Great card again. One of the best win conditions again right now. Heal Spirit is going to be I actually think it's a D tier card. There's pretty much no point in using it. I mean, all the other spirits are better than it. I almost see no one use the Heal Spirit. I mean, I even see the Ice Spirit used more than it. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's D because there's no point in using it instead of the other spirits that you have the option of using. I mean, yeah, it can get value for 1 Elixir only, but definitely took quite a hit when they nerfed it. Hog Rider is going to be A tier. It's always been a pretty solid win condition, and I think that, it's not really risky either, and even if your opponent has the Tornado, you can still work your way around it and outcycle it, so I gotta go A tier for the Hog. Hunter is a B tier card. After the buff it got, it's definitely, viable again and solid, but nothing special, so I gotta go B tier. Ice Golem is actually C tier. I think it's kind of bad right now, and even in Expo and Hog, not that many people are using it anymore. People are preferring to use either the Knight or the Valkyrie. So yeah, I think it's actually surprisingly kind of bad right now. Ice Wizard after the buff he got, I think B. It's an average card now that he does a little bit of damage, or that it has that spawn effect, but not anything special. I think he's actually a low B. You could even argue he's close to being a C, because he still has that low health and dies to Fireball, but that's what I'd say for him. Inferno Drag is A tier. So good. So much value for 4 Elixir, especially if the opponent doesn't have any reset to it, because a lot of people don't have a Lightning, or they might not be using an E-Wiz, and if you don't, then that thing is going to be a nuisance and get so much value. The Knight is going to be B tier. Like I was just talking about, better than the Ice Golem. A lot of people prefer having the Knight over the Ice Golem, but there's cards that are better than the Knight, like the Dark Prince, and I'll get to some of the other ones later, so even the Knight is kind of average. Lava Hound is A tier right now. It's a really good win condition, and you guys will see a lot of the win conditions are ranked high, and that's how it should be, because win conditions are supposed to be strong, right? And Lava Hound is actually a great win condition. I mean, right now, after the Tesla nerf, Lava Loon is good right now, because Tesla, was a pretty solid building against it, because a lot of the other buildings don't even hit air. And, I mean, the Inferno itself is a good building against it, but it's pretty weak. So Lava Hound is kind of dominating right now. Lightning's A tier. It was lower, but because of all the Archer Queen in this meta, people are using Lightning to counter it. So, yeah, there you go. Definitely A tier. Magic Archer is going to be... I actually think it's C tier. Magic Archer recently has not been used as much, probably because the Archer Queen is replacing it in a lot of decks. I mean, Archer Queen's replacing it in Pekka. I mean, gets way more value than the Magic Archer does, and yeah, I don't see it nearly as much. I definitely think it's below average right now in the current meta. Mega Knight, believe it or not, this might come off as a surprise, it's A tier. I know it might be crazy because, I think in previous tier lists I put it in C tier even, or B tier, and talked about how over ladder players are just overreacting about it. It's really not that good, but right now Mega Knight's used a lot because there's a lot of people using Royal Hogs, and it's one of the best counters to it. It also has good synergy with, the Archer Queen and the Golden Knight in spammy type decks, so it's actually a great card in this current meta. Mega Minion is also going to be A tier. Nothing like it in the game. A 3 Elixir flying tank. It's super solid. super solid, pretty versatile, can be used in just about any type of beatdown deck, and you could even see it in some type of, you know, minor control deck too, like that one with the Golden Knight and the Tesla we saw. Minor is A tier. Don't hate me, you know, B-Red fans, but it's actually, it's a very good card, and I feel like people are lying when they say it's not a good card, or they just don't know, because for 3 Elixir, it's a win condition that you can play anywhere on the map. Very versatile. You can use it in just about any type of archetype. I mean, you got Minor Control, which is actually back with Poison, you know, in the Golden Knight. You can use it in Lava Hound. You could use it in, you know, Giant. You could use it in a Mortar deck. I mean, there's a lot of different decks you could use it in. And Minion Horde is going to be... I actually think it's like... It's either C or D tier. I think for now... I actually put it in D tier. I think it's very bad, because Fireball, arrows, a bunch of spells, there's no point in using it. Minions, on the other hand, are B. Basically a better version of the Minion Horde, a lot safer for only 3 Elixir, so even if your opponent has arrows, you actually have a chance of winning. Mini Pekka, surprisingly, I'm going to put it in C tier, because I think it's kind of bad right now. I think even some people thought it needed a buff. I don't think it needs a buff, but in this current meta, it's not great, because it doesn't do good against things like Royal Hogs, which are so dominant right now, and it's just... I don't know, I just don't think it's the best anymore at being... It used to be the #1 thing to take out tanks, but not anymore when you got things like the Inferno Drag and Tesla that are super strong. The Mirror is going to be D tier. I don't know how they got to rework it. I don't know how they would buff it. I mean, they got to be careful. I mean, but yeah, it sucks, let's be honest. Mother Witch, whew, this was S tier. But guess what? It drops down all the way to B tier. It's now an average card. It's crazy how one nerf can make a card that was broken go all the way down to average, and this is because it got a huge health nerf, I think of like 20%, and now there's so many times where it's gonna die where it didn't before. Think about all those times where it was at like 1 HP, was still alive, getting all that value, and it was so annoying. That doesn't happen anymore, so it definitely goes to average, I would say. Musketeer is gonna be B tier. It's kind of like the E-Wiz, you know, it's viable, it's very, you know, very good, can be used in some different decks, but it's not nearly as good after the nerf she got. I think it was the first attack nerf. Arrows are A tier. I think they're one of the best spells in the game right now, kind of along with the lightning. I noticed there's a lot of people using arrows. Ever since they got that rework, they've been a very popular spell, very good. Pekka is going to be, I'd actually say B tier. I think some of the cards in Pekka are what make it kind of strong in this current meta, but the Pekka itself, I actually don't think it's incredible or anything. I think the Mega Knight's a little better than the Pekka in this meta, just because Pekka doesn't do great against the Royal Hogs, but Pekka's definitely seen an increase in usage rate these last couple months. I think before it was like C tier, now I consider it an average card. Poison's A tier. I mean, it's great in Graveyard again. I mean, not as good as the Fireball, though, which is why I have Fireball in S. Poison just an A, but it is certainly above average. Great card. Prince is going to be B tier. I think it's just an average card. Yeah, it's good in, you know, log bait and, you know, that Rascal log bait deck. And, I mean, you know, you'll sometimes see it in Giant Double Prince, but I mean, Giant Double Prince and even that log bait deck, you don't see a ton, and it's so easy to counter. I mean, there's a lot of things like recruits and guards now even, and just, you know, skeletons, so many ways to counter it, and if you have the Elixir, he probably won't break through. Princess is C tier. I think she's pretty weak, but at the same time, I think if she got buffed, she could be obnoxious, so I can't really say I want the Princess to get a buff, but yeah, she's on the weaker end for sure. You know, she can get killed by so many things really easily. Lumberjack is also, I think, C tier, believe it or not, because now that Golem isn't really that good in the meta, Lumberjack definitely not used a lot, really only used in Lumberloom Freeze. The Rage, I think, is D tier because Sparky isn't being used a lot right now, and that was really one of the only decks we saw Rage in. Same with Elixir Golem, and pretty much all the cards in Elixir Golem are in D tier, so in a way that kind of makes sense. Ram Rider is actually A tier right now because so many people are using Mega Knight Ram Rider, Pekka Ram Rider in this current meta, and I don't know why, she's just suddenly become super popular. And I think the Golden Knight and the Queen also pair really well with her, so I think that's why Ram Rider's kind of made a comeback. Rascals are going to be B tier. I think they were like C before the buff, but now they're actually kind of decent. I mean, I can't say they're A because things like a log will completely shut it down, and that's a 2 for 5 trade, and the Rascal Boy, as you guys know, is so easy to counter. So, you know, the Rascals aren't amazing or anything, but they're just an average card now, I would say. The Rocket's C tier because even though it can take out a queen, the radius of it is pretty small, and you can kind of space everything out easily, and also it's just way better to use a fireball in this type of meta. Rocket's like really risky because it might not get a lot of value, and I feel like lightning is just way easier to get value out of it because you can react quickly with it because it's like instant. The rocket takes time and it's got a smaller radius, so rocket is kind of bad right now in my opinion. Delivery is B tier. It gets a lot of value for only 3 elixir. It's kind of an underrated card. I mean, I don't think it's A tier, but in some decks it's really solid. It honestly might be a low A. No, we'll do high B. We'll say it's like one of the best cards in B. But yeah, it's really solid, kind of underrated in my opinion. RG is a very low A tier. I honestly think you could even say it's like B. I don't want to do that because it'll make me seem biased because I like using RG, but I truly think RG right now is not in the greatest spot because of the nerf it got and also the specific meta, but yeah, that's what I would say. I guess, you know, a low A is fine. Royal Hogs are going to be S tier. They're the best win condition in the game right now. Balloon is probably close behind in terms of what the best win condition is, but the Royal Hogs are absolutely insane. I mean, it's the reason why so many people still have to use Fireball. It's the reason why Mega Knight is like actually good in this meta. It's because of the Royal Hogs. Recruits are going to be B tier. They're nothing crazy. I mean, they're pretty easy to counter if you have the right spells, but they do get a lot of value in certain matchups. Skeleton Barrel, I think, is C tier. I even think it could be D tier, to tell you the truth. You know, actually, yeah, I'll say C, just because very low risk to using it. I mean, it is only 3 elixir, and it can work out if your opponent doesn't have the right spells. Skeleton Dragons are C too. I just don't think they're that good. They're pretty weak. Skarmy is actually, I'm gonna have to say, I think it's actually a B tier card, and I think it's, in a way, it's kind of an underrated card. It's also a card that I think is extremely easy to play, which I think promotes people to use it sometimes. The Skeleton King is A tier. This might come off as a surprise to you guys because, you know, a lot of people think that it's a lot worse, but I actually think the Skeleton King, the only reason why people think is like kind of bad is because the Queen and the Golden Knight are so good. I think if the Golden Knight and the Queen got nerfed, I think the Skeleton King people would realize is really solid. I mean, it's super good in bait type decks, and it's a low A, don't get me wrong, but I think of it as being a very solid card. The Skeletons are going to be S tier because they're just very versatile, and I don't think they necessarily need a nerf, but you can't deny the fact that they're pretty broken, and they just pair well in just about any kind of cycle deck, and even medium cost decks they work great in. Guards are A tier for sure. They, you know, definitely got a pretty deserved buff, I would say, and now they're back to where they belong in the game. I mean, they're great in Lava Loon. They're great in, there's some like Mortar decks that play it now, and they're just so good on defense, they get so much value, so I think it's a deserved A for them. Snowball is, I would actually say, do I want to put it in B? I feel like it is B, because even though the buff, I think a lot of people were excited about it, I have to say, compared to the Barrel, which I put in A tier, of course, and the arrows, I still see a lot less of the Snowball, so I actually will have to keep it in B. I'm surprised, because I thought, you know, it would be better, but just comparing to other spells, I gotta put it there. So the Ice Spirit, I'm going to put in C. I mean, I think this is fair where I rank the spirits. Electric Spirit, Fire Spirit, very, very good. Ice Spirit, kind of weak, but I don't think it needs a buff. And then the Heal Spirit is just really bad. Like, all the other spirits are better than it. So the Log is going to be an S tier because I think it is the best small spell in the whole game. And even after receiving, you know, a few nerfs that it got in the past, it still remained to be the most dominant small spell, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon unless Log got nerfed, but I don't know if they'd ever nerf Log, because I don't think a lot of people want it to get nerfed, but it's just so strong, you can't deny that. The 3 Musketeers are actually D tier, and it's surprising because they got their 1 second deploy time back, but I think they're really, really bad. It's probably because this meta, there's so much Fireball, and just, I don't know. I mean, I think they're just really easy to counter as we've had more cards added to the game. The Tombstone is going to be B tier. I don't think it's A tier because I don't consider it being too strong, but it certainly is a lot better after the buff it got, and Lava Loon Tombstone certainly is, you know, one of the strongest decks right now because of that, but I don't think, you know, I'm not seeing too much of it with Graveyard just because Cage is still really, really good, better than it for sure. The Tornado's going to be A tier, kind of a controversial card, has been for a while. I don't think it's S, but I mean, some people still think it needs a nerf. I mean, I think it's fine how it is right now, but I guess everyone has their own opinion on that. The Valkyrie, believe it or not, I actually think is S tier because for 4 Elixir, in comparison to the Dark Prince and some of the other 4 Elixir cards, she just gets a ridiculous amount of value, and I think a lot of mid-ladder players know that too. They're always talking about the Valkyrie, how strong she is, and I agree with that, to be honest, especially in this meta because she's so good against the Royal Hogs. She can pair in so many different decks, and I mean, she honestly could get a small nerf. I wouldn't be against that, but at the same time, it might just be this specific meta why she's so strong. Wall breakers are going to be B tier because I don't really think, I mean, they're kind of, in terms of win conditions, on the lower end, and I just overall consider them an average card. Wizard C tier, I don't think it's D because kind of like the Witch, I actually think it is somewhat viable, but it's nothing crazy. It's definitely not an average card either. Sparky, I think, is pretty bad. I think it's definitely on the low end of C. I think it's almost D, but at the same time, I think because of how easy it is to play and because it is better than the Elixir Golem, I can't put it in D just because I think if it got buffed, it could be kind of bad for the game. Just because, I don't know, I mean, it's a little bit toxic and, yeah, you know, but... Okay, Zap, I'm going to put in C because I had that in my mind that I think it's worse than Snowball. Barbarel's definitely better than it. I mean, really, Zap only fits in, like, air decks now, like Lava, you know, or, like, Pompeo's Balloon deck, but it's really not that good. There's a lot of spells better than it. And then lastly, we have the Zappies, which I think are either B or A. It's honestly a tough decision, but I think I'm going to leave them in B because they don't fit in too many decks. Really, it's mostly just that Recruits Hogs deck. But yeah, guys, this is going to be my ranking. I hope you guys did end up enjoying the video. I have no idea how long this video is going to turn out to be. Probably definitely on the long end, but we'll see. I mean, that's fine. These tier list videos, I like to go in depth and talk thoroughly over every card, so that's fine. I hope you guys did enjoy it, and I hope you like this format better. Let me know if you like this one, and in the future, I'll do it like this, where I do it on my computer instead of on my phone, so you guys can see everything easier. And I would say make sure to, yeah, like the video if you guys did end up enjoying it, and I'll be doing another tier list as soon as, or shortly after the, you know, next balances come out. So yeah, make sure to subscribe if you guys aren't already subscribed. Getting really close to 100,000 subscribers, which is really exciting, and I'll try to get some ideas planned, you know, for maybe doing a 100K special video. I have no idea what that would be, but I'll think about it. Maybe you guys can let me know too. And yeah, thanks again. Until next time, guys.